everyone, I'm Tony Damien.
And I'm Andrew Rich.
And welcome to another edition of Himalayan Bites. Today we are joined by our competition partner, Patrick Gay. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, pleasure to be here.
So Patrick, Treasury has finally released the notification thresholds for the new merger clearance regime. What are those thresholds and what are you expecting to see?
Thanks, Andrew. I think they're appearing on the screen now. You'll see that there are 4 thresholds and a notification will be required if any of those thresholds are met. There are 2 monetary thresholds and 2 market share, market concentration thresholds. I just make 2 observations. The ACCC/Treasury has said that they correspond roughly to thresholds used in other jurisdictions, changed by relative, what's the relative relationship of the threshold to the size of the Australian economy. So that's one thing I'd like to point out. The second thing is just simply on those monetary thresholds, they're interesting because as drafted at the moment, you could trigger an automatic or required filing in Australia based on the size of the acquiring party, even where the assets being purchased or the business being purchased doesn't have a specific relationship in Australia. So it'll be interesting to see what guidance is given around that point or if there's any changes. The second point I note is around the market share thresholds. I think as anyone who's ever dealt with a competition partner or competition law will know, there's always great debate about what is the appropriate market, what is the market share, and so forth. And so I think that will be a very difficult one to regulate and is quite unusual. Most jurisdictions around the world simply require filings based on monetary size of parties, size of transaction thresholds. And so that is actually one thing which I expect might not make the final cut, the market share thresholds, because it will just be very difficult to determine whether or not you actually fit within a particular market.
And I noticed in the Treasury paper, Pat, that the Minister is going to have a discretion to impose even lower thresholds in certain specific sectors, or if a transaction might affect a particular local market. Can you tell us a little bit about that regime?
Yeah, and I think that's right, Andrew, and I think that comes from a long history in certain areas where there are local market concerns. And Treasury specifically noted industries such as grocery, liquor, petrol, certain healthcare providers, where in essence the transactions concern local markets. And so what is proposed is that the Treasury, on the advice of the ACCC or on an evidence-based approach, can designate certain industries or potentially even certain companies themselves, and sort of they say every transaction in this particular industry, no matter what the size, will require mandatory filing. So that will be interesting to see, and also interesting to see what is the level of evidence and proof that the Minister will require in order to make that designation.
So all of this put together, thresholds, notifications, Treasurer's powers, it feels like there'll be a flood of applications in this regime going forward, Pat. Is that a fair comment? How do you see it?
So it's interesting that Treasury says no. So in their paper, you might observe that they've looked at the transactions which were publicly reviewed, and they said most of these would fit within the relevant thresholds. And so they're saying, I don't expect a massive increase in the number of filings. I'm not so sure. I mean, a number of transactions will go across my desk and I'll be asked to comment on them, and I'll say, oh, there's no competition law issue here, and so there's no need to go to the ACCC. But if you look simply on the size of the deal, they likely would trigger the threshold and have some impact or effect in Australia. So I would expect maybe not a floodgate, but certainly more than is the case today, I expect, Tony.
I think that has to be right. Pat, one of the other interesting things is a waiver power that's been suggested by Treasury. How's that going to work, and is that going to be something that's on the positive side of the ledger?
Well, I think that is positive, and there's a couple of things which the M&A community in particular has been interested about, is in terms of public announcements for, on-market deals, on-market takeovers. And so this will be a process which can be used, I think, generally speaking. It looks like you can file application or make an application to the ACCC based on the fact that either the notification thresholds aren't met or aren't likely to be met, and looking for some clarification on that, or also just to say there really is nothing to see here. One of the interesting things will be around the waiver process, whether or not the announcement needs to be public, which will obviously have an impact on potential deals and so forth. So that is something which is still being discussed with with Treasury. One interesting thing, which is a little bit odd to me, is that the ACCC has 30 days to make a decision as to whether or not to grant a waiver, but under the process has 15 days to make a sort of a fast decision. So you might find in certain instances people say, well, I prefer to just file the application and say that there's no issue here so I can get a decision in 15 days rather than waiting 30 days for the ACCC to say I don't need to make a filing.
Pat, obviously things are moving quite quickly now in this space. When are submissions due on the merger clearance thresholds, and when are you expecting all of this to become law?
So the submissions are due on the 20th of September, so I encourage anyone who wants to comment to get out there and make a comment soon. And then the idea is that the legislation will come into effect on the 1st of January 2026.
Patrick Gay, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you everybody for watching, and we look forward to you joining us on the next episode of Himalayan Bites.